The long school hallway was nearly empty, echoing only with the squeak of Daniel's mop and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. He had worked as a janitor here for 5 years, and though the job was far from glamorous, it was steady. More importantly, it gave him flexible hours so he could pick up his daughter, Lily, after school. Every night, as he pushed the mop bucket from one side of the corridor to the other, he reminded himself that this was how he kept food on the table and shoes on her growing feet. Tonight felt no different, until a fragile sound interrupted his rhythm. A muffled sob, thin but sharp, carried down the row of lockers. Daniel paused, tightening his grip on the mop handle. The sound pierced him in a way that was all too familiar. He had heard Lily cry like that on the nights when she woke from bad dreams, or when the loneliness of not having a mother weighed too heavily for her young heart to carry. Setting the mop aside, Daniel followed the sound cautiously. His boots tapped softly on the tiles as he rounded a corner and spotted her, a little girl curled into herself at the base of the lockers. Her knees hugged her chest, and her tiny fingers dug into her sleeves. Her shoulders trembled with each ragged breath. She looked no older than his own daughter. Daniel crouched down slowly, making sure not to startle her. "Hey," he said gently, his voice low and steady, like he used with Lily when she was frightened. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer. She shook her head violently, strands of her hair sticking to her tear-streaked face. Her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps, and Daniel recognized the signs of panic. He knew better than to pepper her with questions. Sometimes words only made the storm worse. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added softly. "You're safe here." For a moment, it seemed like she didn't even hear him, lost in the whirl of her own fear. Daniel's chest tightened. He reached for something, anything, that might help. His janitor's cart was just behind him, filled with the usual supplies: sprays, rags, gloves, spare trash bags. But tucked in the corner was something different. A small plastic tube of bubbles he always carried for Lily. As his fingers brushed against the familiar toy, Daniel's heart eased slightly. Maybe this was exactly what the little girl needed. He held the small plastic tube in his hand for a moment, almost self-conscious. To anyone else, it might have looked silly. Soap bubbles weren't the usual answer to tears. But he had seen it work before. Sometimes Lily's storms quieted not with lectures or scolding, but with something light, playful, and unexpected. He twisted off the cap, dipped the tiny wand into the liquid, and without a word lifted it to his lips. Slowly, deliberately, he blew. A cluster of bubbles shimmered into existence, catching the pale glow of the fluorescent lights. They floated upward, drifting lazily through the hallway, glimmering with rainbows before bursting one by one in soft, soundless pops. The girl's crying faltered. Her red-rimmed eyes lifted, following the fragile orbs as they danced through the air. A small hitch escaped her throat. Not quite laughter, not quite a sob, just surprise. "See," Daniel said softly, keeping his tone light. "Even when things feel heavy, bubbles float. They don't care how dark the hallway is. They just rise." He dipped the wand again, then offered it to her. "Want to try?" The girl hesitated, shrinking back as though unsure if she was allowed. But Daniel didn't push. He simply smiled and blew another long breath, sending another stream of bubbles her way. A few drifted close enough to pop against her sleeve and hair. She flinched, then blinked, and a tiny smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Your turn," Daniel said, gently placing the wand in her trembling hand. "Big breath in, and blow out nice and slow. Like you're pushing the bad feelings away." She lifted the wand uncertainly, took a shaky inhale, and blew. At first, only foam sputtered through. Her brow furrowed, and Daniel chuckled quietly. "That happens to me, too. Try again. Gentle, like you're whispering to the bubbles." She tried once more. This time a single bubble wobbled into the air. It hovered for a few seconds before bursting. Her eyes widened, then softened. I did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yeah, you did," Daniel said with an encouraging nod. "Want to see if you can make two?" The girl tried again, and soon the hallway was filled with floating bubbles. Her breathing slowed, each exhale steadier than the last. Where moments before there had been sobs and trembling, now there was the sound of her soft giggles breaking through. Daniel leaned back on his heels, letting her take over. He didn't need to know what had upset her. In that moment, it wasn't about the reason, it was about giving her space to breathe again, one bubble at a time. Neither Daniel nor the girl noticed the figure standing quietly at the far end of the hallway. Olivia Morgan had arrived at the school earlier than expected, slipping in through the side entrance after a brief meeting with the principal. Her schedule was packed, as always, conference calls, investors, deadlines, but when the school called again about her daughter's struggles, she dropped everything. She had told herself she was coming just to check in, to reassure Emily that she was there for her. But the truth was, Olivia carried a knot of guilt that never seemed to untangle. A billionaire CEO, she had conquered markets, built empires, and held the respect of entire industries, yet she could not seem to ease her own child's pain. No amount of money, private tutors, or high-paid therapists had been able to soften Emily's anxieties. So when she rounded the corner, expecting perhaps to find her daughter sitting alone, she was startled to see the sight before her. Her little girl, who so often curled up in silence when the weight of her worries pressed too hard, was blowing bubbles in the middle of an empty hallway. The wand trembled in her hand, but her face glowed with a fragile smile Olivia hadn't seen in weeks. Beside her, crouched low to the ground, was a man in a janitor's uniform, watching Emily with the kind of patient, unhurried attention Olivia herself struggled to give. Olivia froze. She knew this man only in passing, a background presence she had occasionally glimpsed during school events. His uniform was worn, his boots scuffed, his expression marked with quiet fatigue. Yet in this moment, he looked nothing like a man bound to mops and buckets. He looked like a guardian, coaxing her daughter back from the edge of panic with nothing more than soap, air, and gentleness. Her throat tightened. She thought of all the specialists she had hired, people with polished credentials, who spoke in clipped tones and charged more per hour than some families made in a month. None of them had managed to reach Emily like this. None had made her breathe deeply, smile shyly, or giggle at the shimmering bubbles drifting toward the ceiling. For the first time in a very long while, Olivia felt powerless, and it humbled her. She realized she was watching a kind of magic that money couldn't buy, the kind that came from lived experience and genuine care. She pressed a hand lightly to her mouth, steadying her own emotions. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, it was something more complex, something that unsettled her. A question she had avoided asking herself for years: was she failing her daughter in ways that couldn't be solved with wealth or resources? As she lingered in the shadows, she noticed how Daniel didn't try to pry into Emily's feelings. He didn't interrogate her, didn't rush her, didn't treat her panic like a problem to fix. He simply gave her space to be, and with each bubble, Olivia could see her daughter's spirit mending. When Emily finally spotted her mother, her face lit up. "Mom!" she exclaimed, her small feet pattering against the tiles as she ran straight into Olivia's arms. The bubble wand was still clutched tightly in her fist. Olivia knelt and gathered her daughter close, pressing her cheek to Emily's hair. Relief washed over her, mingled with shame that it had taken someone else, someone unexpected, to soothe her child. She kissed Emily's temple and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." As Emily nestled against her, Olivia lifted her gaze to the man who had been at her daughter's side. He had already stood, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his janitor's cart, as though ready to slip back into the background where people rarely noticed him. "Thank you," Olivia said, her voice carrying a tremor she hadn't intended. "For whatever you just did for her." Daniel gave a small shrug, the kind of gesture that suggested he didn't think it was anything extraordinary. Kids get scared sometimes. Sometimes they just need help finding their breath again. His tone was matter of fact, but there was warmth in it too, a quiet confidence born not from training, but from being a father who had learned through trial and error. Olivia studied him closely. His uniform was plain, his shoes worn thin, and yet there was a steadiness about him that made her feel oddly unsteady. Here was a man who, despite the simplicity of his role, had shown her daughter a kind of attention she herself had been struggling to give. Most people wouldn't stop, Olivia admitted, her arm tightening around Emily. Most would walk past, or call for someone else. But you didn't. Daniel shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. "I've got a daughter too. About her age," he nodded toward Emily. "When she gets overwhelmed, sometimes bubbles help. Sounds silly, I know, but it works." Olivia's chest tightened at his words. There was no arrogance in his explanation, no need for recognition, just the quiet honesty of a man who cared. She glanced down at Emily, who was still twirling the wand between her fingers, calmer now than she'd been in days. "It doesn't sound silly at all," Olivia whispered. She hesitated, then added, "In fact, it sounds like something I should have thought of." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft buzz of the overhead lights and the faint pop of a stray bubble bursting near the ceiling. Olivia felt the weight of her billion-dollar empire pressing against her shoulders, contrasted with the startling lightness of this fleeting, human moment. She wanted to say more, to ask about his daughter, to thank him properly, perhaps even to apologize for her own absence in Emily's struggles, but the words tangled in her throat. All she could manage was another quiet, "Thank you." Daniel gave her a small, almost bashful nod, then began to steer his cart away. He didn't linger for praise or acknowledgement. To him, it had been a simple act of kindness, nothing more. But for Olivia, it was not simple at all. As she held her daughter and watched the janitor's figure retreat down the hallway, she felt something stir within her. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the sense that this encounter had cracked open a door she hadn't known was there. A door to understanding, to humility, perhaps even to a connection she hadn't realized she needed. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," she said softly, holding up the bubble wand. "Can we get some of these at home?" Olivia blinked back tears and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, sweetheart," she murmured, her eyes still fixed on the man disappearing around the corner. "Yes, we can." She knew, deep down, that she would not let this end here.